So this morning, it's going to be a little bit different because the message is going to be up on the screen. Peter Bentley is the person that we're going to listen to. He is a pastor and spiritual director and currently has a role with the Wellspring Centre in Ashburton. Peter has recently been diagnosed with Parkinson's. And as a result, sometimes his health is unpredictable. So this can affect his speech. So he's kindly pre-recorded today's message for us to listen to. It's amazing how even in our times of sickness, God can still move. And even though this has happened to Peter, he's still able to bring God's word to us. So let's listen to that now.
Hi, I'm Peter Bentley, and it's great to be able to share with you today. I'm feeling a bit like I'm on familiar territory, as I was pastor at West Preston Baptist Church in the early 90s. Since then, I've been pastor at Ashburton Baptist Church, and then moved to be involved as director of Wellspring Centre in Ashburton. 2013, I embarked on a doctorate looking at spiritual formation and have been involved in teaching in areas of spiritual direction, spiritual formation, personality and spirituality, and in contemplative practice. Today we're looking at the topic of listening to God in the times when God seems silent. I want to invite you to just spend a couple of minutes in silence and notice what you are listening to. What might you hear? What are you listening for? What voices might be emerging in the silence? Do you sense they are God's, yours, or your inner critic? So let's just, if you would like to, close your eyes or even leave your eyes open, whatever works for you. But we're just going to take 2 minutes to be silent and just to listen to what comes for each of us. So just find a comfortable position to sit in, preferably with your feet firmly on the floor. And if you're in a comfortable seat, sitting up so that you're not distracted by how you're sitting. And just notice what comes to your mind as you sit in silence for 2 minutes. I'll let you know when the 2 minutes is up. let's come out of the silence as we consider a couple of stories about people who have sat in silence and waited to discover God. We are a culture that is uncomfortable with silence generally. On my walks in the morning and evening with my dog, I notice many people with ear pods or headphones on their ears. There seems to be a discomfort with just observing what is happening around them and listening for the sounds that naturally come to us. I want to look at two Bible stories that are set in quiet desert locations. One at the start of a life of ministry and the other at the end of a life of ministry. The first story that comes to us is from Matthew 4, and it is the story of Jesus' retreat to the desert before embarking on his ministry. Let me read it to you. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your feet against the stone." Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendour. And he said to them, "All these things I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. In this story, Jesus hears voices that seem reasonable in terms of preparing him to embark on his ministry after his baptism. These voices seem to be sympathetic to his needs for sustenance, recognition, and influence in a world that needed to change. Firstly, there was a voice that called for food to sustain him after fasting for 40 days in the wilderness. But he discerned this was not God's voice, even though his physical body was in need of sustenance. And the voice was reminding him of his own power and capacity to provide a solution. Then there was a voice inviting him to make a name for himself and set his mission back on course by impressing the crowd that would have regularly gathered at the temple by jumping off the roof and surviving. But he chose not to listen to this voice. Finally, there was the voice, the invitation to become a powerful, influential leader in the world by taking an easier route of obtaining global control. But he rejected this call as well. When we reflect on Jesus' later ministry, we notice that these voices continue to arise from urgings of his followers and the crowd, who want to make him king, but he rejected these calls. What do we learn about listening to voices around us? All of us are influenced by the expressions around us whether they're old voices of parents and friends or colleagues, or our own voices of self-criticism. When we spend a few moments in silence earlier on this morning, I wonder how many voices you heard in the silence. I heard my voice saying, I wonder how people are feeling about being in silence, and how much longer should I keep this going for? You may have heard voices like, why is Peter asking us to do this? Or, what am I supposed to be listening for? Birds? Children? God? Jesus heard voices that appealed to his needs and thinking, but recognized they were not from God. It is often when we are still or quiet or start meditating that our minds become noisy, or what the Eastern mystics call monkey mind. This distracts us from listening to or becoming aware of God's presence that is constantly with us. Sometimes we expect God to speak to us in ways that are overt and concrete. But as we will learn in our second story, Elijah found out it was in the awareness of God's presence in the silence that brought God's presence into his grounded awareness. So the second story I want us to just briefly look at is the story of Elijah, as recorded in 1 Kings 19. This is near the end of his ministry. And it's where he finds himself running away from danger, authorities who were seeking to capture him and silence him. He just experienced an extraordinary and dramatic experience of God. He had been on Mount Carmel, where God miraculously sent fire to consume not only the contents of the altar that he'd made, but the whole altar itself, including the water that he'd poured over it. Now he was alone, having upset the authorities, and he had retreated to the desert for safety. It was while he was in the desert that he further experienced God's provision and presence when God sent birds to feed him. However, amidst this time, he still struggled to sense God's presence with him. Finally, he sensed God was going to present himself to Elijah, and I imagine Elijah was expecting another dramatic intervention that was on a grand scale. However, as we read in 1 Kings 19, starting at verse 11, it says, he said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Elijah experiences God's presence in sheer silence. The ancient Christian mystics agree that God's primary language is silence. This does not mean absence, but it just means quiet, attentive presence. Now, why is this relevant to listening? What are we listening for when God is silent? Another word that equates to listening is awareness. When we are told to listen to our bodies or to nature, we are being invited to become aware of what we are feeling or noticing. In listening for God in the silence, we can be honing our awareness of His silent presence in our lived experience. This then grounds the divine into our everyday reality of life here on earth. Paul reminds us in Romans 1 verse 20 that we come to know God through being aware of what God has made. Paul writes, ever since the creation of the world, His eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, and I would say silent as they are, have been understood and seen through the things that He has made. That is why the psalmist encourages us to be still and know that God is present. In Psalm 37 verse 7 he says, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Do not fret over those who prosper in their way, over those who carry out evil devices." And in Psalm 46 he says, in this very familiar verse, verse 10, "Be still and know that I am God. I am exalted before the nations. I am exalted on the earth." Too often we think we need to act, to do something or say something to evoke God's response to us. But Elijah experienced it was in the stillness or quietness that he knew God was present. Very different to Elijah's more dramatic Mount Carmel experience. There are a couple of things that I want to encourage you to take away from these stories. The first invitation is to notice who and what are the voices that we listen to and respond to. Are they divine, or are they sparking our need for affirmation of our physical, emotional, or spiritual needs? As Jesus discovered, these voices that seem to address these needs and fulfill our desires by doing the obvious thing can be voices that are distracting us from God rather than drawing us into an awareness of His presence. This is where discernment or deep listening is critical to our noticing the presence of God. The second is that God is present with us constantly, even though oftentimes it is in the quiet and the silence. The invitation is to come and recognise His presence as Elijah did. The famous psychologist Carl Jung had a sign over his study door that read, "Bidden or not bidden, God is present." Whether we ask or we don't ask, God is still there with us. There is a song by Peter Mayer called "Holy Now" that invites us to notice God, the Holy One, in everything around us. Let us listen to it as we reflect on the stories we have read together.
When I was a boy, each week on Sunday we would go to church and pay attention to the priest. He would read the holy word and consecrate the holy bread, and everyone would kneel and bow. Today the only difference is everything is holy now. Everything is holy now. was in Sunday school, we would learn about the time Moses split the sea in two, and Jesus made the water wine. And I remember feeling sad, miracles don't happen still. Now I can't keep track, 'cause everything's a miracle. Everything's a miracle. Wine from water is not so small, but an even better magic trick is that anything is here at all. So the challenging thing becomes not to look for miracles, but finding where there isn't one. When holy water was rare at best, it barely wet my fingertips, but now I have to hold my breath like I'm swimming in a sea of it. It used to be a world half there, heaven's second-rate hand-me-down, but I walk it with a reverent air, 'cause everything is holy now. Child's face, say it's not a testament, that'd be very hard to say. See another new morning come, say it's not a sacrament, I tell you that it can't be done. This morning outside I stood, I saw a little red-winged bird shining like a burning bush and singing like a scripture verse. It made me want to bow my head. I remember when church let out, how things have changed since then. Everything is holy now. It used to be a world half there, heaven's second-rate hand-me-down, but I walk it with a reverent air, 'cause everything is holy now.
I want to thank Peter so much for sharing with us. I'm really grateful to be able to hear from him, even though he faced some challenges. But it's really encouraging message and transformative in some ways in terms of how we think about silence and how we think about our awareness of God. We've been in a series here at Northern talking about sharing God's heart, which is about connecting with God and connecting with others. And Peter kind of shared with us this practice about listening, and that listening isn't just about hearing things, it's also about being aware of God when he's not speaking audibly to us. And all of these things that we are talking about in the last couple of weeks and in the coming weeks are things that help us, don't help us become more spiritual, they help us do humanity well. And that's something that we want to do better here. We want to do life well here at Northern. So I've just put those questions. I don't know about you, but for me, sometimes when someone is speaking and they say really valuable things, the questions kind of you go, what was that question? So I've just written them down. These are the questions that Peter asked at the end before he played that song and shared that song with us. So who or what are the voices that we listened and respond to? Are the voices that we listen to drawing us deeper into awareness of God's presence? And God is with us constantly, and learning to hear and see him takes practice. So this week, how could you notice and recognise God's presence? So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes just to reflect on that. We'll just play some music while we do that.